Hello, everybody, and welcome to Shuranigans. My name is Colin Shuran, and I'm here to explore the lives of extraordinary people and topics. On today's show, I am honored to present Jerry Fox. Jerry is a lifelong musician in which he has performed with many nationally recognized artists, and he's also a founding member of the 1980s country music band called Bandana. The band went on to be featured many times on Billboard's Top 40, and they were also nominated for Best Vocal Group of the Year by the Academy of Country Music. Jerry's also performed on the Grand Ole Opry, which I imagine was a huge honor, and we can get into that later. Mm-hmm. And in the present day, he has devoted himself to creating gospel music, which you can find on his most recent album titled Gospel Journeyman. So without further ado, Jerry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Colin. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So I want to start way back when you first picked up a guitar. When I was doing my research and everything, I noticed a little backstory of how you got into music. So I wanted to know, when did you know that you wanted to be a musician?
Okay, well, I wanted to play. Probably from the time I was 13 or 14. I'll tell you a little story about my brothers. I started playing a 6-string guitar when I was about 13. I had an uncle who knew a couple of chords. My dad knew a chord or two, and my family was in the radio business, and this was back when you still had live shows. You might have a 15-minute music show and a band would come in, or even a single with a guitar. So I was exposed to that, and I thought, well, gee, that's really neat. They can sing and play guitar. And so and being in the radio business, I was exposed to a huge record library and had free reign. And so I would just, if the label looked interesting to me, or the name of the artist, the title of the song, I could take it back. And there was another studio that was like an audition studio where they would audition the new records that came in. I could go back there and just... it was like traveling around the world, hearing all this music. But we would, my mom played cello. Now, she gave it up because she had 3 boys, and I was the oldest. I had 2 younger brothers. They were a year apart. And I was about 3 to 4 years older than my next brother. So you can imagine she had her hands full. So she had to give up the cello. Dad played the accordion and sang in a gospel quartet. His side of the family were musical. He had 2 brothers who sang. One of them was a great pianist. He played professionally with gospel quartets. And a sister who also played piano and could sing. So they had a family quartet. And this was before I was born. And on my mom's side, her mother played piano and played organ in church full time. And that's how she came to play cello. So it was just, I guess it was in the genes. And but I can recall we lived in a little 3-bedroom ranch-style house. It's probably built in the early 50s when we moved from Texas to Oklahoma. And it was one of those that had a living room combination dining area. And the living room was carpeted, and the carpet stopped, and then it was linoleum in the dining area. Well, after dinner, Mom and Dad still be sitting at the table, and Dad's reading or something. And so my brothers and I would do a show for them. And they had ukuleles, little plastic ones. And in fact, I can't believe she let us do this, but she let us get her cello out of the closet. And that, of course, became a bass because we were small, and the cellos are small, quite a bit smaller than a string bass. So anyway, we'd entertain, and we were actually making up songs. And I must have been 12, 13, 14. And then by the time I was 16, I got my first electric guitar. And I started really practicing a lot. there were guitar bands like the Ventures. Dwayne Eddy was big, and these were instrumental hits. You don't hear many instrumental hits anymore. And I'd try to figure out what they were doing and just taught myself basically. And of course, that my parents always. Dad said, well, that's fine if you want to play music, because by the time I was 16, I had my own little rock and roll band. It was other kids my age, and we played, American Legions. We played the Catholic, what they called them, the CYO, the youth group, or whatever they were called. They would have dances in the basement at their church, and we'd play in school and things like that. And we were all self-taught. We just figure it out, Had a friend of mine who was a drummer who could really sing. And my father always said, look, if you want to play music, that's great, but you need to prepare for something other than that. You need to go ahead and get an education, find a field you think you like. And so I did finish college, played music all the time I was in college, and was actually probably making a lot more money than I would have working somewhere else. But that was kind of the beginning of it. And I joined the National Guard when I finished my junior year in high school. And I don't know if they'll do this now, but they would let you enlist at the end of your junior year, and then you would spend that summer at a summer camp at an Army base. And then you would go, the drills were once a month for the weekends. And so when you finished your senior year, so when you graduated, that's when you went to active duty for 6 months, the way it was set up at the time. So you spent, actually it was the end of the summer, I think, when I left for Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. So there was 6 months there that I was active duty military. And at the post at Fort Leonard Wood, they had a servicemen's club where you could go check out musical instruments, and they had a music room. And I met other players there. I met a guitar player from California who could really play. In fact, he had played with Buck Owens, so he said. And so we played together, and just there on the post. And when we could get off base, like on the weekends or something, we go hear bands and things like that. And I went to St. Louis with him. Ended up, I think he wanted to go to the burlesque shows. That was why we went to St. Louis. And here I am, I'm 18, 19 years old, and I just said, well, I don't know about that, I said, you go ahead and tell me about it. I did go to one with him, and it was all military guys, all uniforms. And who was on that? Pigmeat Markham. Now, your grandmother will know who that is.
I can't say. I don't know who he is.
Well, his punchline was, "Here come the judge. Here come the judge." He was the comic on that show, and the star was a woman called Tempest Storm. So it was really experience. And they had a little pit band. It was like 2 or 3 old guys, guy playing drums, guy playing piano, and I think a trumpet. And so it was a throwback to, gosh, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and that whole seedy part of St. Louis. I'm sure that's all been plowed under by now, that whole neighborhood. But I digress here. That didn't have a whole lot to do with music. But the guy I befriended, he was really helpful. And whenever the outfit, I was trained to be a lineman, because when they were out in the field, if you're out in a combat situation, you can't always use radios because they can be intercepted. So if you just wanted to have right behind the front line communication, you'd just run wires, and everybody would have kind of like a walkie-talkie, and then they could talk and nobody could intercept those signals. And there would be a big spool, and you'd run through the woods and threading out that wire and then hook it up to these radios. And and I learned to climb poles, which was not my cup of tea, but it was necessary because you had sometimes to go up on a pole to string wire. And it was a combat engineer outfit that we were trained with. And I think the last 2 or 3 months, they were going to go out in the field and just stay out there for like 3 or 4 months and just live off the land out there. Try to duplicate that kind of a situation for preparing for Vietnam or wherever. And but the superior officer said, "Well, you're a National Guard guy. You're getting out in 3 months, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, we don't need you out there in the field. There won't be much, They didn't want to put any more time in training me because they knew I was about to get out." He said, "So we're going to make you permanent barracks orderly," which meant I stayed behind, and they were gone. But I think they came in at night. They did come in at night. But my job was to clean the barracks, clean the latrines, and just sit there all day, basically. And I had bought a nice Fender Stratocaster guitar while I was there at that base. And I think it was Rolla, Missouri, in a music store is where I bought it. So I had nothing to do but practice, because 4 or 5 hours. I practiced so much that the joints in my left hand got to hurting so bad. I went to the doctors, the Army doctors there, and they did X-rays and everything. Says, "Well, it looks like you have just exercised it too much." They couldn't really find anything wrong. But that's where I made a major leap, in my ability to play. And so when I got out and I went back to Oklahoma and I enrolled in college there, well, I got a job with a band. I was the lead guitar player, and it's all out of that experience in the military. And I went to a state college in western Oklahoma. That's where I grew up, out in western Oklahoma. And there was a band there. There were 2 or 3 bands on campus, and there was one band didn't have a bass player, and I had picked up a bass. No, I hadn't. They didn't own a bass yet, but I noticed they had 2 guitar players. One of them just played rhythm and sang. The other was the lead guitar player, a drummer, and a piano player. And I saw them at one of the school dances, so I went up to them and I said, "Y'all need a bass player." And they said, "Oh, do you play?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And I didn't own a bass. I'd never picked it up. And they said, "Well, we rehearse once a week on campus. They had a music department. They had these rehearsal rooms that you could any of the students could reserve one of those rooms. That's where they rehearsed." And they said, "We're going to rehearse next week, Wednesday or night, I guess it was." And so I needed to find a bass so I could do the audition. And I rode the train from Weatherford, Oklahoma to Oklahoma City, and a friend went with me, probably my roommate, and bought a bass in a pawn shop. I think I paid $75 for it. It was a Japanese bass. And so I went to the audition, and they said, "Oh, that's great." Said, "Yeah, well, you're in." And they were playing at a nightclub off campus, and they had kind of a steady job there on the weekends. So I started playing bass, and this bass was awful. The neck had a real long neck, and it was already bowed when I bought it, but the strings got an inch off of the fretboard. But it turned out that I picked up the guitar at one of the rehearsals and started playing, and the lead guitar player says, "Man," said, "you play lead guitar a lot better than I do. Why don't you play lead guitar and I'll switch to bass?" And because the first four strings, I call them the bottom strings. The bigger strings are tuned an octave lower than the four strings on a six-string guitar. So if you can find your way around on a six-string guitar, you can find it on those four strings on the bass. Everything's just an octave lower. So we swapped places, and I had that nice Stratocaster guitar that I'd bought when I was at Fort Leonard Wood, and it was a rockabilly band. And gosh, Elvis and all of that. We were doing the Beatles that had just started invading, and anyway, it was good money, lots of attention. We played school dances and that sort of thing, but the music was just kind of one-dimensional. It wasn't really satisfying for me. And in the meantime, I don't know how this guy found out about me, but he was in the Air Force at a base about 30 minutes or so from the campus. And he was a drummer, and he was from Virginia, Portsmouth, Virginia, a black guy. And he called me one day and he said, "Hey," he said, "we heard you can play bass and play guitar." I said, "We have a little jam session here at the air base. I'd like to invite you to come." So I went. They were playing jazz way over my head. And I took my bass. By this time I had bought a nice Fender bass. And so I could play some of the stuff they were playing, but then they would start improvising, and you'd get over my head pretty quick. But he could sing. He was a great singer and a great drummer too. And he was taking night classes at the same college I was going to. And turned out he had met some other musicians there on campus, and a keyboard player who had a Hammond organ and also played trumpet, and they recruited me on guitar and the bass player from the rockabilly band and this drummer to start a band called the Mark IV. And it was started out to just be rhythm and blues, and James Brown, Ray Charles, the stuff that was popular at the time, Wilson Pickett, and because that's what the kids were dancing to. And it turned out to be a really good band. But we could do a lot. We did Rolling Stones, we did the Beatles, we did whatever was popular, Tom Jones, and we went to Oklahoma City, which is about an hour and a half drive from where we were going to school, and auditioned at a nightclub there called the Onyx Club. It was the nicest club in Oklahoma City, and got the job. And I think we started out playing 4 nights a week. It turned into 5 nights. And we were commuting because we all had classes. I had 8 o'clock classes, and we played at 1 o'clock in the morning, and we had the hour and a half drive. But this band became really popular in Oklahoma City. The place was packed every night, and we made really good money. And the guy that owned the club, he loved us. And when we would get a school job or a dance or something and we want to book out, he said, "Well, what are they paying you?" And we said, "Well, it's pretty good money." He said, "It's a one-nighter." And he said, "I'll double it. So you just tell them you're not available." He didn't want us to leave. He didn't want us to go anywhere. And we played there for about 2 years, 2.5 years. And it was, I remember my first 8 o'clock class was a geography class. I said, I got to have a gut class that early in the morning because I'm going in there and I'm dragging, we got home at 3 in the morning. And I remember the instructor, she caught me dozing, and she just came over and kind of just nudged me. She said, Mr. Fox said, you're going to have to make a decision. Do you want to study geography or you just want to keep playing music? But anyway, I got through it. And we now, we're all single. We're like, 18 years old, and some of these girls that we had met in Oklahoma City, they'd come all the way out there to see us. And they had a strict rule. This was a very conservative school. You couldn't have women in your dorm room. You couldn't have them in your apartment if you lived off campus. And they said, well, if it's a woman, that's come to visit you, she can stay in the women's dorm, and we'll just pair her up with somebody there. So I think the guitar player and I, we got caught, and we had to go to the dean's office, and which it wasn't a good experience. I mean, he lectured us and all that, and he said, now, if y'all want to go to school here, you're going to have to play by the rules and all that. So we said, yes, sir, won't happen again. We're sorry, da. So anyway, we survived that.
So that's what it was like to be a true rock star. Y'all had the first feelings of being a true rock star, I guess.
Yeah, that was, I remember we played a dance at the Armory, and I think some friends of ours promoted it. They were also students. They actually rented the Armory, advertised it, hired us, promoted the show, and the stage was right in the middle of the big room in the Armory, and you could not stir them with a stick. That place was jammed, so the promoters made out fine, but they were all students, and it was, so everybody knew who we were and all of that, and that was sweet. I mean, I didn't mind that at all. And I remember watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan during that period. And with a couple of guys in the band, and it just blew our heads off. You said, wow, what is this? It was so new, so fresh, because you still had, in pop music, you still had Doris Day and Rosemary Clooney. You still had the old school from the 50s, and the Beatles, they killed a lot of people's career. A lot of singers that came out of Hollywood and New York that were doing pop music. It was a whole new thing, because once the Beatles hit, then you just had the floodgates open. You had all of these acts coming out of England. And the Rolling Stones, some great bands, and it was just a whole different thing. I mean, it was zeroed right in on the kids, where their parents were still listening to some of the old school singers and stuff. We were popular enough. We opened for Simon and Garfunkel, the Lovin' Spoonful, some of the big names at that time. The Simon and Garfunkel gig was kind of strange because it was in a theater in the Round out in Framingham, and at that time, Simon and Garfunkel they were still doing a duo. They'd already had some hits, Sounds of Silence, and they'd already had 2 or 3 hits, but they were still doing their show, just the two of them, with Paul Simon playing guitar. And so I don't know how we got on that bill. Our manager got us on it, but so we show up there for a sound check, and we got long hair, and we're hippied out. And Paul Simon asked the promoter, said, are these guys the opening act? And he said, yeah. Said, yeah, they're pretty popular around here. Said, well, could we hear them? He said, yeah, they're setting up. We're going to set them up. We're going to do a sound check. We'll have them do a couple of songs, and you can check them out. Our manager, he came and said, he said, when you guys get up and do your sound check, Paul Simon wants to hear you do something. He said, man, pick the tamest thing you got. Pick the tamest thing you got. So we had a ballad or something like that. So we played that, and Paul Simon says, oh, they're fine. They're okay. So we got past that. But when we did our set, we did what we normally do and trashed the stage and all of that. And the people loved it. They loved it. They loved Simon and Garfunkel, but it was a young crowd because they were appealing to college kids. And so anyway, that was an interesting show. We did another a Beatle. The Beatle had two. They had Hard Day's Night and Help. They had their two movies, the first two movies out, and there was a theater there in Boston that had a Beatle festival. So they showed those two movies back to back all day and into the night. I guess up to 1 or 2 in the morning. And then they hired us to play a short set between the films. I think we played 20 minutes, maybe 4 songs probably. And of course, it was all kids, because the Beatles were so hot at that time. Well, we didn't. We watched the movies a couple of times. So, but then we would just hang around backstage and out in the alley, and the lead singer, he brought a case of wine. So we were back there drinking wine, and by after 6 or 7 hours, we're just getting looped. And I don't know how we got out on stage, or we got out. They had to push us out on stage. We got through the gig all right and got paid and everything, but it was awful. The music had to be awful. I wasn't conscious enough to be able to tell. But anyway.
Now, when did Bandana come along?
That was after I moved to Nashville. I had married a girl I met in college. We were born on the same day. She lived in the same year, and she lived in an apartment next door with women, and then I was living in an apartment with about 3 or 4 other guys. And so we both graduated at the same time. We moved up to New Hampshire. Well, first I played down on Cape Cod. My senior year, I got a job. The rock and roll band ended up breaking up. They wanted to go to New York. I said, man, I'm not going. And I don't think they lasted much longer after that. So I got a job playing with a comedian, playing bass with who was a singer, played guitar. He could sing, sort of. But his name was Dick Doherty. Dorety, and his tagline was "Dirty Dick Doherty." He was one of the first insult guys that he played the Copacabana. He kind of became a big deal after a while, but he would use profanity on stage. He'd put people down, make racist jokes and all of this. And had a big following. And we played downtown Boston, and the mob controlled a lot of those nightclubs and things downtown. And I think this was in the basement of a hotel. It was a big club. They would have these R&B bands play dance music, and then Dick would do his set. His jokes were like, he would pick on the ethnic groups. The Italians, he was Irish, but he would pick on them. The blacks, he would drink. He's Irish. He would get drunk, and the drunker he got, the crazier he got. And one night he went too far with the Italian jokes because the place was run by Italians. And he left the club that night, and some big guys were waiting for him when he got out to his car out in the alley, and they put him in the hospital. And we didn't work for about a month. I mean, he was in the hospital for like a week or two. And when he came back, you know, he was just all cut. His face was all cut up and everything. It took a long time for him to heal to where he looked anything like he did before. His nose was broken.
Wow. That just goes to show you don't mess with Italians.
That's right. You don't. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but that was the Boston experience. Then I moved to Nashville, and I'm on my own. I'm single, and I was playing in a country band. There was a country band out of Boston that was real popular because there weren't that many country bands. The guy that owned the band also was a booking agent. And so I went to work in his office, and I was booking bands too. I was working as an agent. And his band would get the job opening for all these Nashville acts that would come through. Or if it was, say, a guy that was his peak years were over, but he still could sell tickets, well, then we would be his backup band. Guys like Ferlin Husky, people like that were real popular back in the 50s and 60s, they could still play a fair up in Maine someplace. And so John he would get the act for the promoter, and then we would be that person's backup band. On Monday nights, they had a jam session because that's when all the road musicians would get back in town by Sunday. They'd usually leave on Thursday or Friday, go out and play 3 or 4 towns or shows, different places. And then on Monday night, all the road musicians would come in there and they would jam. And that's where you met people. Well, he said, yeah, come on down to Demon's Den when you get in town. Come down on Monday. And so I did, and I sat in and met some of the guys. And then he called me, I think the next day. He said, oh, there's a new act on Epic Records that's looking for a bass player. It's a girl singer, and they're auditioning bass players this Thursday. And it was down on Broadway, Lower Broad. They had clubs down there, and the house band was going to let bass players sit in with them. And her name was Charlie McLean. She ended up having several number ones, top tens, did duets with Mickey Gilley when he was hot, the urban cowboy thing and all that was happening. And it was the strangest audition because it was Charlie, her manager, a guy named Johnny Duncan, who also had some hits. I think he was on Columbia, he may have been on Epic. And he was friends with Charlie, so he was there, and her band leader, who was her drummer. So they're sitting out there, and they had 3, maybe could have been 4 bass players, and they said, yeah, just go up and sit in with the band, play 2 or 3 songs, just let us hear what you do. And I did, and after I came off, they said, well, you got the job if you want it. And I said, oh, okay. We're going to start rehearsing next week at SIR Rehearsal Studios because Epic Records had hired this choreographer from Hollywood to come in and work with her and work with the band put her show together. We rehearsed all week. The next week, we were on the road. We did this tour that the record company had set up. It was like a meet and greet tour where you go play all these popular places all out west. And we went up into Minnesota, Wisconsin, had our trailer stolen in Missouri, lost all our equipment. And all I had ever heard was, man, you're going to end up delivering pizzas. You're going to do, you're going to be some kind of day job or something to get by. And, what it amounted to is being at the right place at the right time, having what the people wanted, what she wanted, she needed. Her band leader, he's a drummer. He recognized, this guy can play. I got fired from Charlie McLean. We're on the road. I'm single, so I'm acting like a single musician. And in the meanwhile, Charlie had taken up with her guitar player. I don't know if I should be saying this. I won't mention any names, but I guess it can be looked up. He's dead now, rest his soul. But and for some reason he decided he didn't like me, and so he convinced Charlie that, hey, we need to get somebody else. We don't need Jerry. And I don't know, maybe as I was carousing a little bit too much, and because I'd end up with a woman at her house, and they're wanting to leave, and so they're looking for me. and my parents can't hear this; they're both in heaven, so I guess they can hear it, but they'll forgive me. So I ended up playing down in Printer's Alley in working for another comedian down there, in fact, who played guitar. He was a good singer, good guitar player. And I can't remember, it was the Embers, I think the Embers Club. It was a nice place. I don't know what Printer's Alley is now. It kind of went downhill, but it was the night spot in Nashville, back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, I guess even in the 90s. So playing for this guy, I met the drummer who would become the lead singer for Bandana, and the keyboard player. The keyboard players were playing for this comedian, Joe Van Dyke. That's where I met him. And then the drummer, he had been playing with Brenda Lee, and I don't know what happened. He took this job, and the comedian was always on him, just making fun of him and riding him all the time. And he finally said, "Man, I can't take this anymore." He quit. And that's Lonnie Wilson took the drum chair, and I don't remember how he found out about it, because I didn't know Lonnie until he came into the band. So that was the nucleus of Bandana, although we didn't even have plans to play on our own. We were going to work with this guy because he paid well. Then he told us, "Well, I'm going to go out west on a tour." And I said, "You guys want to go with me?" And he told us what we would make. And he was going out to Phoenix or Tucson, Arizona. There was a big hotel out there that he had played before. He was real popular in that area. So we went in 2 cars, pulling a trailer. Had his brother worked the spotlight, sound or whatever, and he had a girl singer. And so she, I think they were dating at the time. So we went out to Tucson. We played that hotel for something like 2-3 weeks. We did play a date in Phoenix. And then he said, "Now I've got a date in Houston. We're going to play there for 2 weeks." So we went from there to Houston. And while we're in Houston, he says, "Well," I said, "I want to go to Vegas." I said, "You guys, are you on board? You want to go?" And so the piano player and the drummer and I, and he had this musician from Tucson who joined us out there, good guitar player, who also played trumpet. So that was the band. And so we got to talking, said, "Man, we all came to Nashville to get in the studios and write songs. And here we are, we're out here on the road, and he wants to take us to Vegas, and we're just going to be sidemen out here just, living on the road." And that's not what we all wanted to do. So we decided, well, let's give him our notice. Let's go back to Nashville and do what we want to do. So he had us wearing these gunfighter outfits. The long black coats and the boots, big black boots came up to your knees. They were really cool though. The black scarf, these black hats and stuff. We said, let's have a picture made wearing those outfits. We're not going to tell Roy what we're doing. And we asked the guitar player, say, "Well, you stand in this picture with us, get your uniform." So we had our picture made out behind the hotel, And we asked the guitar player, says, you want to go with us? So we're going to go back, and just to make a living, we're going to try to book us as a band, and in order to get by. And because you're not going to pull up and get studio work. It just doesn't work that way. So he said, and he thought about it. He said, I don't think so. I said, Roy's been good to me. He pays well. He said, I'm going to stay with him. And then we leave. We go back to Nashville. And the girl singer, she wanted to leave too. She had had enough of Roy, the comedian guy. And she had started dating Dolly Parton's guitar player, and who he played with Eddie Rabbitt before that, and then he was playing with Dolly Parton, a really nice guy. They ended up getting married, the girl singer. She said, can I go with you guys? She said, I'm wanting to get out of here. So the three of us and Peggy, we go back to Nashville, and we said, well, and Peggy, we were backing her. She's part of the show. And we said, Peggy, you want to stay with us? We're going to get us a job somewhere, whatever we can find, at Opryland or someplace. And she said, yeah. So we wanted to make more money and play some bigger places. And the UA Tower down on Music Row is that tallest building down on Music Row. There's a booking agent that had the penthouse up there. He lived there. His offices were there. And his name of his company was Let Us Entertain You. His logo was a head of lettuce. This guy was real eccentric.
Yeah, sounds like it.
So we show up, we walk in, and we say, well, can we see the agent? We're here. We got a demo tape. We went out and had a picture made at a Harding Road, $35. It was awful. But we got a friend of Lonnie's to stand in the picture, so there'd be four of us. But it was the piano player Lonnie and I, and the friend of Lonnie's, who happened to be a drummer. They were both from Louisiana. They'd grown up in the same West Monroe area. The agent, he comes out and he shakes our hand. So, well, come on back. He said, let me see what you got. We go back into his penthouse, and it's one big space, about 3 times the size of this room we're in. But you had the kitchen over there. He had this bigger than king size bed, had these glass walls that looked out over Nashville and everything. And so he took our cassette, put it on, laid down on the floor, and he's got his eyes closed, and he's listening to the music. And I don't know what he thought of our picture. It was awful. So after the end of it, he gets up and he says, why'd you bring me this? He said, I can't book. These are original songs. These are demos. Said, the bands I book play cover music. They play the hits. So what am I supposed to do with this? And it kind of dressed us down and said, well, that's all we've got, But the agent says, wait a minute. He says, you guys wait out in the front lobby there, and let me have your cassette. I'll be back. And he goes across the hall, and there is a record producer that's on the same floor with him across the hall. And he's got a receptionist, and he's got a big office suite and all that stuff. And he had ran IBC Records it was an independent label, some backers out of Texas. They'd had some hits. Jeannie Pruitt, Satin Sheets to Lie. Oh, that was on IBC Records. He had ran that label and everything. And he also was managing Sawyer Brown, that became kind of a contemporary of Bandana and Alabama. Alabama was hot on RCA. They were selling a lot of records and selling out shows. All of the labels were starting to look for those kinds of acts. That was the Beatles' influence on country music. Bands that could sing. So the agent comes back and he said, well, here's your cassette. He said, Stan wants to see you. Y'all go across the hall. Stan Cornelius is his name. So we went in there and we go in his office, and he said, did you guys write these songs? And Lonnie and I said, yeah. He said, well, where did you do that? You know, who's playing on that? I said, well, that's us. We're playing on it. He said, it is? His eyes just lit up. Like you could see the cash register running. He said, well, have y'all signed with anybody? I said, no. He said, we're just trying to survive. We're trying to work. And he said, well, I think I might be able to help you. He said, we're going to have to do, you got any more songs? I said, well, yeah, we're writing all the time. He said, well, you keep bringing me some songs and let me come up with something, see if I can help y'all. And he said, if you'll go in the studio with me and we'll do some of these songs that you got on your demo tape and try to get a more polished version of them, and then let me see what I can do with it, because he knew everybody in town. So we did. He booked us out in Hendersonville at a place called Doc Studio. That's where we cut our first records. And then he pitched us to all of the major labels, and Warner Brothers bid. They liked it.
Yeah.
And he told me, he said, well, I've been to Capitol, they passed on it. And I went to RCA, they've already got Alabama, they don't need you. Every major label was looking for a band like that could sing, a young band.
I was wondering actually about Bandana getting nominated for Best Vocal Group. What led y'all to that?
That is people, CMA, ACM, Academy of Country Music Association, there may be some others out there. A group of people can, there's like 2 or 3 rounds of nominations. Mm-hmm. And we had a fan club based out of Boise, Idaho that was really active. They did a monthly newsletter. They would buy a booth at Fanfare, which is what they don't call it Fanfare now, but it's the CMA week. It's when they have the big award show. Mm-hmm. It's that week, and they would come. All these members would come to Nashville and man that booth, Fanfare booth, and we would spend some time in there, you know, because they press the flesh and all of that, you know, meeting fans. And so they got us on the ballot, and I don't know, we weren't a party to really what was going on, but we just, the fan club said, hey, you guys are in the nomination for the ACM. So put it in the bio.
Yeah, that's still a big honor. Hey, a nomination is just as good as winning an award. So
we also got to do the CMA New Faces show. That's the CMA, and I started doing other things. Got my insurance license. I got my real estate license. I became a home inspector. I sold burglar alarms. Did a lot of different things. And then I decided to move down here. My wife and I opened a bed and breakfast in the 5-bedroom, 5-guest room bed and breakfast in Wartrace. I had a home inspection business. I hired a couple other people. All my business was in Nashville. But our marriage was just not good at all. It was a bad time, and we thought, let's get out of Nashville, let's get a fresh start. We had a daughter by then. She had 2 boys by her first marriage, moved to Wartrace. Everything settled down. It was good for a while, for a few years. That divorce experience, I think, is what brought me back to the Lord. That's what I felt so lost, and she wasn't. Wouldn't go into church until we got married, and I said, "Well, you got 2 boys. You know, we didn't have our daughter yet." he said they need to be exposed to this, and you and I need it, and I think the experience of the breakup of that marriage, which was just brutal. It was brutal. The divorce took years to get done, and it was just the worst stuff you can imagine. And after I was on my own, I turned back to God, and which led me to stop writing secular songs and start writing gospel songs. Joined a church, got my life squared away. I'm the happiest that I can remember being.
Sounds like you've had quite the journey.
It has been.
Lots of ups and downs, it sounds like, but it sounds like you're in a really good spot now.
It's really good. Life is good.
Well, I think that's a good spot to wrap it up, but really appreciate you coming on the show.
I've enjoyed this, Colin. It's therapy.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I want to go ahead and plug your website, jerryfoxmusic.com.
Yes.
Go listen to Gospel Journeyman.
So I appreciate you, letting me be on your show.
Absolutely.